Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Is there anyone here for the first or second time? Great, welcome. 2 people. 3, 4. Please welcome them. Now we'll go around as is our custom. Say our names. My name is Douglas Hall.
I'm Bob Sirukan.
I'm Joe.
I'm John.
Todd Hope. Eric.
Cass.
Judith.
Tony.
Aaron. David.
Steve.
Paul. My name is Jay.
My name is Michael.
My name is Kevin.
John.
Peter.
Max.
Jack.
My name is Tage.
Richard. My name is Ray Dyer.
Will.
Joe. Jim Stewart.
Peter. Harvey.
Lee Robbins.
David. Richard. Jim Winters.
Rule.
My name is Jerry Johns.
George. Jim.
Steve. Jose.
David. David.
My name is Guy.
Marvin.
Our speaker today is one of our own, a Sangha member, Bill Weber, and he's been practicing associated with Spirit Rock for about 15 years, and he considers Eugene Cash one of his primary teachers in the last 10 years or so, and he graduated from the Community Leaders Dharma program at Spirit Rock. Professionally, he's a video editor and documentary filmmaker, and recently he's been working on 2 documentaries, one concerning Alzheimer's care and the other concerning the eradication of polio from the world. And both of these are slated to be shown on HBO next year. Bill?
Thanks. Greetings, everybody. I'd like to begin with just a little reflection on the sitting practice. We've all been sitting here in silence for the last 30 minutes, and it's sort of a bold and brave and very telling thing that we do. And I'm sure that we all have different practices. We all maybe do different things when we sit in silence for a while. Maybe a mantra, maybe following the breath, maybe even no matter what you do, I'm sure there's a fair amount of spacing out and all a number of things that go on. But no matter what happens, I think there's a certain level of awareness that arises when we sit in silence for a while. And it's a fairly typically unusual thing that's done, especially in this culture. We're generally very active. But part of the awareness, I think, that will come up, no matter what our practice is that we're aware of the body. At some point, there's an ache. At some point, there's a level of tiredness. At some point, there's a desire to move. We're aware of the body on some level. I mean, I can almost guarantee that everybody had some awareness of that in the last 30 minutes. What does the body feel like, at this particular moment? And it's probably also fairly common that there's some awareness that came up around emotional states. Am I anxious? Am I tired? Am I afraid of something? Am I angry about something that happened? Generally, there's some awareness around our emotional state, which we don't often sit back and pay attention to in quite this level of silence and quiet. And I've had the opportunity to teach about, 6 or 7 beginning meditation classes. And one very common thing that comes up from people that are just starting to sit in meditation and silence is the level of self-judgment that goes on. I don't know how to sit. I don't know what I'm doing. I wish I could sit better. There's some level of self-awareness that can be very judgmental, that often comes up as we just sort of sit quietly for a while. It's sort of very common. And I bring this up now because I think these are very useful tools to really, the ability to pay attention and the ability to see this and to sort of let this help be our guide to sort of how we function in the world on some level. Which brings me into service a bit. When I was called a number of months ago and asked if I wanted to speak, it was suggested that one thing I speak about is a group I work with through GBF that does service work. It's one of sort of the service branches of GBF, of which is actually quite a few. And the one I take part in is I work with a meal program at this place run by Larkin Street Youth Services. And they there's a residence hall for 12 young adults aged 18 to 24 that have HIV. These are kids that have mainly been homeless, or foster kids, or kids that have no place to go, that are dealing with HIV. A lot of them, it's full-blown AIDS, which I don't see so much of, but I go down there and these kids are coming or going in and out of the hospital a lot and things. And they have a residence hall where it's very well run. It's in a very bad neighborhood. But they have a cook that comes in for them during the week, but on the weekends, nobody comes in and really cooks for them. So it's sort of just up for staff and volunteers, to cook for them. And here comes Bill, who is actually one of the GBF members who comes and helps cook over there. So this whole organization is really sort of an offshoot of something that Clint Sider, a GBF member, started 11 years ago, doing homeless meals for people in a homeless facility through GBF, and then it sort of branched into Larkin Street a few years ago. And then Larkin Street said we have a need at another place, because the first place where GBF started to do this was just a residence hall for kids. It wasn't a place and it was more of a temporary residence hall for youth. And Larkin Street called GBF and said, we have another place where we'd like to maybe do a second program. And Clint called me and said, would you mind heading this up? And I was like, no, sure. And, so part of it, what was the need there? And the need is that they don't have people that really cook for them much on the weekends. So there's that particular need right there. I saw even a greater need and sort of layered my own, ideas on top of what I saw as the need. And part of it is, even when people go in and cook for these kids, there's not a lot of, they aren't getting meals that, I wanted to make sure they got meals that had a certain level of nourishment about them and a certain level of care put into it. And also just to sort of raise the bar of sort of what kind of food they get. Because this is a place that deals a lot with like frozen fish sticks and, oven baked, French fries and stuff like that. And again, not to demean the work that goes on at Larkin Street, because I think it's really wonderful. But to really go in with a few people and really make lovingly cooked meals with healthy food and, some level of sophistication about them. So we've been doing this for a little over a year now. Another need I saw is that these kids are, I pretty much say they're all gay. I mean, if you're that age and dealing with HIV, you're all gay. And I also wanted them to have the experience of hanging out with other, middle-aged gay men, who come from all different other kinds of walks of life and whose really only intention of being there is just to be kind and to be nourishing to these kids. They have social workers and things like that, but we aren't there to really solve or help their problems so much, just to cook them a nice meal. And so it's a different kind of role modeling I saw a potential for in this place that seemed to me to be pretty healthy. So it's this act of service that's very generously supported by GBF. I'm given a monthly stipend to go out and buy, good food and go over there and cook it and get a wonderful group of people to come and help me cook it. And it's a bit of a sangha for us then too, the volunteers that do this work. And it's funny because, one thing that I found sort of interesting about this experience for myself, last year I hit a pretty dark period in my practice. And I say a period in my practice, but it was just sort of a dark period in my life when I was just sort of overwhelmed by a lot of by the world. It just overwhelmed me. And I think I also hit a point in my own personal practice where, and I'm told this is somewhat common, that after 15 years of fairly serious Buddha connection, it all didn't make much, not that it didn't make sense to me, but it didn't resonate with me in quite the same way. I didn't want to hear Dharma talks. I didn't particularly want to sit. I'd read Dharma books and they would just seem sort of silly and useless to me. It was sort of a new, I don't know. The one thing that resonated with me though, and that in a very deep way, is the desire to go out and be of service to others, to be of use. That was the one part of my practice that stayed, and it stayed in a fairly substantial way. I now don't mind hearing Dharma talks again, and I now like reading the Dharma again. So that's all sort of past, but and the service is still there too. So the story is told in the time of the Buddha. As you can imagine, the Buddha had many very devoted followers. Hell, you're hanging out with the Buddha. You would want to hang out with him, I would think, and to serve him. And so a number of the disciples, the story goes, went up to the Buddha and said, oh great one, how can we best serve you? And his response was, if you'd like to serve me, serve the sick. Simple enough, very direct, very humble. But as with almost all the teachings that I love about the Dharma, there's so many different layers to it. It sounds, on the surface, it does sound humble, and it also sounds like, there's suffering in the world. Go out and deal with it and help alleviate some of this suffering. So there's a very practical and direct sort of way we can look at that. But in serving the sick, in serving those in need, I think there's all these other levels that can lead to our own sense of happiness, contentment, enlightenment, freedom, understanding, wisdom, compassion. All of this is sort of contained in this act of serving people in need. So it's a sort of very leveled, layered response, I think, to how can we serve the Buddha, to serve the sick. So I ask everybody in the room now to take a moment and just reflect about when is it that you feel most contented? When do you feel like life is good? That this is that you're on. That there's a certain level of happiness that you have. When you think about that, when is it really rich for you? This is where the whole practice that we do in silence of paying attention, I think, can really come into play and help out. Because usually when we are deeply contented or happy, there's a certain feeling in the body. There's a certain thing that we notice, a certain way we feel physically. It can be warmth. It can be expanded. It can be like a vibration, a tingle, an energy, a vitality that's very physical, that can be very felt. our body tells us when we're really connected. And to go back into when is it that we really feel happy and most, alive, I think is often when we're when there is a connection with something outside of ourselves. I think for a lot of us it can really be when we're in communication with a friend or a family member or a loved one. It can be when we're walking into nature and we really feel like, this is part of us. These trees, this creek, this grass, this is part of us. It's not just so much, this small, separate sense of self, but this connection to something much bigger. So what do we do to connect to that? What do we do to sort of foster our own happiness, our own contentment? And when we look at it and when we feel it in a physical sense, we realize there's some sense of connection. How do we connect? What do we do to go out there and connect and to foster this? My partner and I live on this block in this wonderful neighborhood in the Castro. And there's this older gay couple that live on the corner that have been there since the late 60s. And just these really wonderful gay men. And one of them went into a pretty big health decline last year. And he used to garden a lot. And he has a couple of trees out on the street. And he'd always fill all the little tree boxes with flowers every year. And I've been in the neighborhood for 20 years, and it was always there for 20 years. But in the last year, he's in such bad health, he doesn't come outside much, so he hadn't been planting flower boxes. And then one day I noticed there's flowers out there, and sort of unbeknownst to me at the time, my boyfriend had gone out there and gone to the store and bought some flowers and went out there and planted his flower boxes. And, it was just this wonderful way of serving this wonderful man who lives on our corner. And again, even in telling that story, I realized my own physical sense of connection, of warmth, of whatever, just really increased. And maybe it did for you, and even in hearing it, just this act of serving, what it can do for us physically. And what a wonderful thing to do, is to make some guy on the corner feel better, and to make the block look better, and to continue this tradition. I mean, all of this just from the simple act of very simple service. Part of the power of this act of service too is to maybe step outside of what I like to call today our personal dramas. And that's another reason I was talking at the beginning about what happens when we sit here in silence, is that we realize our personal dramas can go on and on and on in our heads sometimes. Whatever our dramas might happen to be at the time. I'm having a terrible time at work. I'm having a terrible time with my partner. I'm having a terrible time with my family. Or, I'm not getting the respect. Whatever our personal dramas that just sort of go on and on and on and on. And that aren't to be belittled in many ways, because a lot of us are dealing with some very difficult stuff. I mean, maybe all of us are dealing with very challenging stuff from time to time. But if we just wallow in that all the time, it gets to be overwhelming and not particularly helpful, I don't think. So one way, I see service as almost an antidote to help get us out of these personal dramas that just go on in our head all the time. They can be quite serious. A few months ago, I rented this documentary on Allen Ginsberg, and at the end of it, there was a DVD extra of an interview with Patti Smith. I imagine most of you know who Patti Smith is. Sort of a punk goddess from the 70s who became a grand poetess, and I don't know. She's just a wonderful, wonderful poet, musician, performer, person, whatever. And she was talking about she sort of left at the height of her career, became a housewife and moved to Detroit, and was living with this man, and in 1 month, her husband died and her brother died, the two people she was closest to. And she said she went into a funk that was really deep and really severe. And she gets a phone call from Allen Ginsberg, and Ginsberg says, I'm really sorry to hear what you're going through. I really feel for you. But I think one of the best things you could do right now is to go out and be of service. I'm doing a benefit concert. Why don't you come and perform with me? And Patty, who hadn't performed in years, said okay, and she went out and did this benefit concert with Allen Ginsberg. But what I find fascinating is that this was Allen Ginsberg's medicine or suggestion or offer of help to Patty is, you're really dealing with some serious stuff. Get out and serve. I like that. Service can also sort of help us keep things in perspective, which can also sort of help us with our personal dramas. And and maybe even to sort of help us restore some sense of balance sometimes. Before I started editing longer films and documentaries, I spent years editing TV commercials. And it can be it's a very high stress environment, and people take this stuff very seriously. And stupid things like, the copyright or the titling or, the product placement or the color. It goes on and on and on. It's total neurosis around this process of making a TV commercial. And I took it seriously. I was way deep into it too. And in '93, when I just pretty much was beginning with my connection with the Dharma, I signed up with the Zen Hospice Project over at the Zen Center, which is still going on, been going on for a long time. And that was back when they had a facility where GBF actually used to first meet, was over on Page Street at this house where they housed 4 people with, back then it was mainly AIDS. And they had a volunteer program, and one Thursday a month for 3 years, every Thursday evening, or most every Thursday evening, I'd go over there and cook, clean, change diapers, hold hands. Even occasionally you'd wash bodies. And just things like that. And for me at the time, I was always amazed at how that balanced me. I'd come from work doing these commercials and being totally frazzled, and then go and deal with some explosive diarrhea and leave feeling like I'm in balance. I have things in a better perspective now. The lower third on that commercial is not such a fucking big deal. And I also had a real sense of, all these different things. Happiness to be alive. Happiness that I was of use. There's a high that comes out of it. I used to say that if people were really selfish, they'd be involved in service work because there's a really nice return from it. You get a lot of return. I don't have a watch.
I'm watching.
Where are we now?
It's 11:25.
Thank you.
We train into 11:50 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to have time.
So I can ramble on for a while. Thanks. I know my teacher Eugene has been here a couple times, and one of his favorite things to talk about is appropriate response. And I know his wife has spoken here a few times, Pam Weiss, and she even has a website up now, appropriateresponse.com. And Eugene talks about that. I mean, he goes back to, I think it's Dogen, back in the 13th century Zen. It was like, what's the purpose of a life of practice? And it was really to really develop an appropriate response. How do we respond to the situations we encounter, that arise for us? How do we respond appropriately? And it's a beautiful thing to look at and to consider. I was cleaning the garage with my partner yesterday morning, and we got in an argument. And I even knew at the time that I wasn't responding appropriately sometimes. I was responding out of anger. I was right in the middle of it. It's like, this isn't right. But it just sort of happened. And then I pulled away for a while, and I just sat back, and it's like, how do I really respond appropriately to the situation that's going on right now? There's tension in my body. There's anger in the room. What's the appropriate response? It's a great place to sort of sit with our practice and to allow some awareness to be there. But, so to me, service is like the perfect appropriate response to so many things. I mentioned that last year I got into a pretty dark place with the world the way it is. And it just seems to me it's very easy, and you almost have to be blind not to let it affect you sometimes. There's a lot of, without going into the litany of it, for me I think there's a lot of things that are very scary, either between the climate or the population or the planet or the genocide or the starvation or the, human rights. I mean, it goes on and on and on. How do we respond appropriately to that? This is Ram Dass was really keen on, and has been, probably still is, I'm sure, really keen on service work. It's been sort of a passion of his and a real point of practice. And he wrote a book called Compassion in Action. And compassion in action really equates to service, because that is compassion in action from Ram Dass. When we look at the vast sadness and suffering in the world, we often experience intense pain in our hearts. The suffering so often seems cruel, unnecessary, and unjustified, reflecting a heartless universe. The human greed and fear that are causing much of the suffering seem out of control. But when our hearts open in the midst of this, we want to help. This is the experience of compassion. I love that. Our hearts open in the midst of it. And we all know that to be true. That's why it's so painful, because our hearts open in the midst of it. But the heart opening is a beautiful thing and something that we can act on, and use that as a call to action, this opening of our heart. And that is the experience of compassion. So the appropriate response in this is acts of compassion, I think, to this world that we live in. It's also sort of where do we wallow? What do we, it's sort of like that old commercial with Madge and Palmolive liquid. It's like, what are you soaking in now? Are we soaking in sort of our own personal dramas and our own suffering, or in the scariness of the world, or are we going to maybe shift that around a bit and in our own acts of kindness and selflessness? A few months ago, I saw this article in the New York Times. The New York Times is, I love reading it, but it really sort of, in many ways, it confirms all my darkest attitudes about the planet. It's like, yep, here it is, proof every day. Oh my God, more war, more genocide, more lies, more... But every so often you come across an article that opens your heart and it oftentimes makes me cry and makes me really connect in a different way. And this was an article about the massacre, the killing of all the students at Virginia Tech a little over a year ago. And the title of the article is, "At Virginia Tech, a daughter's memory spurs called to serve." After their daughter Austin was killed in the Virginia Tech shootings last year, Brian Cloyd and his wife Renee asked that donations in her honor be sent to a program that repairs dilapidated houses in the poorest parts of Appalachia. To the Cloyd surprise, the program received nearly $70,000 in gifts almost immediately. We realized that there is no better therapy than doing more of that, said Cloyd, an accountant professor at Virginia Tech, who began organizing trips for students to work in the hollows of Virginia. But for the Cloyds, the trips were not just an attempt to heal, they were also a chance to redefine the memory of their daughter, a process that sets an example for a university still struggling to move forward as the first anniversary of the massacre approached. For us, this has become a way to remember these students, many of whom were very involved in activism and service. They should be known for how they lived rather than how they died. This year, the Cloyds have ushered about 150 Virginia Tech students and faculty members on 5 weekend house repair trips and plan to continue running regular trips from now on. In the classroom, Professor Cloyd has shifted beyond his typical focus on taxes and begun offering an honors class called Inventing the Future Through Our Ut Prosim Tradition. Ut Prosim, which I'm not pronouncing probably right, is a reference to the university's motto, which means that I may serve. Students in the class spend 1 weekend working with the house repair project and the rest of the semester developing proposals for other types of service. In Jonesville, the Cloyd's efforts brought 69-year-old Lucille Moore to tears. Honestly, I don't know how to thank these people, she said, shaking her head as she peeped shyly through her window, watching Mr. Cloyd and his students dig holes for corner posts that would soon support her new porch. A year ago, Miss Moore said, her house seemed to be caving in around her. The water heater broke, part of the roof caved in, the foundation started to collapse. Miss Moore said she had little money to do anything about it. Her life, too, seemed to be closing in. She had a daughter die of a heart attack, a brother-in-law died of a brain tumor, and her husband died of unknown causes, all within about 2 years. But Miss Moore stopped crying when asked about the Cloyds. What they have gone through, and now they have started all this, she said, wiping her eyes, it just makes me strong. For the Cloyds, repairing the homes of others was a way to restore their sense of humanity. Oh, I love that story. And I love the whole concept of restoring our sense of humanity. And I love the fact that this woman whose house was repaired, who's gone through so much herself, had also this great compassion for what the Cloyds went through. And part of what we see, I think, when we do service work, is we connect to the suffering that we all go through. We get outside of our own pain and see, we're all in this together. I like even a university whose motto is that I may serve. It shouldn't be in Latin, it should be in English, really big on it. There was mentioned that I'm working on 2 different documentaries, and they both really deal a lot with service work in different ways. One of them is on this effort to eliminate polio, which has been going on for 20 years. And some of the amazing statistics about this is, polio is really close to being eradicated, but it's not. It's still out there. And that 20 million people have been working on this effort in the last 20 years, and that most of them were volunteers. So there's, 15 million, 18 million people have been out there trying to eradicate a disease so the kids don't become crippled and become crippled adults. Huge, huge volunteer effort. The film, this polio film, was actually the brainchild of this man named Larry Bruein. And Larry Bruein's this old hippie who actually was a friend of Ram Dass's and took Ram Dass to India. And Larry Bruein and Ram Dass started this organization called SIVA. I don't know, probably, and I think in 1978 it was started. And since SIVA was started, they've raised $60 million and have helped 2 million blind people see again in India, Nepal, Tibet, Cambodia, and Tanzania. So, these 2 middle-aged hippies sitting around saying, we can do something. So they started an organization, and now 2 million people that were blind are no longer blind. Service. This other film is on caregivers for people with Alzheimer's. And it's really fascinating. I don't get to go out and meet the people. I just get all this footage that's brought into me. So I get to sort of sit around my office and look at these people that, whose lives are pretty much devoted to caring for people with Alzheimer's. And, it really comes in, how do we care for the sick and the old in this country? And it's amazing how many people are out there with Alzheimer's that some of these caregivers we're following in this film go to these facilities and they say, oh, it's so nice that you come and visit your loved ones because most people here don't have any visitors, The humanity that comes out, reclaiming our own humanity. This one man really, I mean, he's probably in his early 70s, I would say, and has the sweetest face. He had a wife who had Alzheimer's for 11 years, and he saw his wife go from being a very vital person into being this very overweight vegetable that, that had no response to much of anything after a while. And he spent 11 years caring for her. And then when she died, he now goes and volunteers at this Alzheimer's facility. And you can see the vitality and the joy that comes up within him in doing this. And I'm sort of amazed. It's like, my God, after you've gone through that for so much, why would you want to continue? And again, I come back to the paying attention that we do, the paying attention that we do when we sit, that just happens at some point. What really makes us feel good? What really makes us feel connected? What really makes us, have a sense of vitality and connection, So, we all do service work. And we all do a lot of service work that I don't even think we consider service work. I know a lot of you in this room, and I know the level of friendship a lot of you are able to offer your friends. That's a huge service. The ability to be there for somebody, the ability to care, the ability to be an ear, to be a witness, to help somebody through health issues, to help somebody, whatever. This is all service work that we all do. And the reason I want to bring some of this up now is because I think it's really important that we take some comfort and some joy in our good work. It sort of comes back to what are we soaking in now? We all do really good stuff. Realize that and soak in that for a while, it's very healthy and it's very healing. So, we're good friends. I think a lot of us are really good family members. A lot of us are really good neighbors. We take part in our communities. We practice acts of kindness, maybe occasionally. This is a type of service. Sitting here in silence and paying attention to ourselves and, with maybe a bit of a desire to become more peaceful, more loving, more compassionate people, that's an act of service. That's a huge act of service. Jack Kornfield tells a story about practicing in Cambodia in the early 70s, in the middle of the war. And how at times it was like, is what we're doing really of service? And the feedback they got from the Cambodians and the Vietnamese and even the American soldiers around there was, it was sort of twofold. The people that actually came there saying, "Oh my God, we're finally in a place of some sanity in the midst of all this insanity." It's a huge act of service. And for the others, they said, even just knowing that you're there practicing in the middle of all this helps bring us a sense of sanity in the midst of all this. So sitting is an act of service on some level. Generosity. We all are generous at times. GBF is generous to support this program that we do for the Larkin Street youth kids. Generosity is an act of service. And another one of my favorite teachers, Gil Fronsdal, down in the Redwood City, told me a long time ago, he said, if you're going to practice anything in Buddhism, generosity, and you can get full enlightenment, you can go the full way, generosity. That's it. And it's an act of service. A couple of years ago, I spoke at the Urban Dharma group, and I talked about service. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Urban Dharma group, but it's sort of the Dharma punk group that meets on Friday nights over by the park. And I have my own preconceptions about sort of how, people that are heavily tattooed and pierced, I sort of associate them with sort of the Johnny Rottens of my younger years, so like fuck you to everything, and that's not true. And when I was talking to them about service, I asked, what kind of service do some of you do? And this one woman, heavily tattooed and pierced, said, once a month I go and I do hair for at a homeless women's shelter. I go and do hairdos, and it's like, oh, it's beautiful, Another woman did free tattoos on people's bodies who had suffered a great loss, and she would put the tattoo of their loss on their body as an act of service. And I bring that up again now too, because not only should we take delight in the service that we do, but I think it could also be really useful to sort of say, what else can we do? There's a lot out there. There's a lot in need. And there's plenty to be done. One thing I sort of find myself hoping for around this election that's coming up, and that I have a sense around Obama, is that there maybe an American call to action again, American call to service, like we had in some sense back in the Kennedy years. It was the whole Kennedy thing about, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. We seem to be very far away from that right now. It's more like what can I get, and much more what can I get, and not so much what can I give. It'd be really sweet if that shifted around a little bit. So, I add the suggestion that maybe all of us could consider maybe volunteering more. There's hundreds of organizations, hundreds of places to do it. Or you could even sort of do what, Ram Dass and Larry Bruein did and start your own something to do. The one thing to really be careful of around this is not to layer self-judgment. I'm not doing enough. I should be doing more. Again, take delight in what you do, and then maybe look for something else. But don't use this as another way to beat yourself up. We got plenty of that already. And in closing, too, I'd like just to also mention that I think there's a particular relevance for this act of service for us as gay men. Mostly gay men, not all gay men. As gay people, we don't historically and traditionally have the support of becoming part of a family unit, in the sense that we don't generally raise kids. That's changing some, it's thankfully changing some, but I think that's one way that, people greatly service by raising kids. You really step outside of yourself. You step outside of your personal dramas to some degree. You have to. Or you better. Not everybody does, I guess. And we also, and the culture we live in can be very sort of me-oriented and image-oriented, and I think as gay men we can certainly fall prey to that sometimes. I know I sure do. So this, the act of serving, the act of getting outside of ourselves, the act of connecting with a larger family, I think it can all be really beneficial for us. I also think that we have something sort of unique to offer sometimes too. A creativity, a sensitivity that is maybe a little bit more peculiar to gay and lesbian people, that can really be beautiful to offer other communities. I've taken part in a number of the AIDS life cycle events, and it's amazing to be in. One of my favorite things about it, and one of the reasons I think it's such a powerful event, is that the whole thing is basically run on service. There are 600 people that volunteer a week of their time just to basically serve the riders. Bike techs, cooks, people carrying your gear, doctors, nurses, massage therapists. All they do is serve you all week long. So me as a rider, all I do is I get up in the morning. There's somebody serving me breakfast. There's somebody fixing my bike. There's somebody serving me a snack. There's somebody, it's just service. And to experience a world like that for a week is just like, wow. It's pretty incredible. I think one of the... one more reflection on service, and then sort of as gay men too, or as homosexuals, that... But basically, I think about everybody here is old enough to remember what San Francisco was like, or wherever you were in the 80s and 90s when, hell was, upon us. And how did we respond? How did we respond appropriately when, people were dying right and left? And what happened out of that was probably the greatest sense of community that I had experienced, certainly as a gay man, just arose. All these organizations arose, many of them still around, to offer care, to offer financial support, to offer, they even had organizations that would take care of your pets. It was really incredible. This huge outpouring of service in direct response to what we all were facing. In closing, again from Ram Dass. Compassion in action is paradoxical and mysterious. It could be service is paradoxical and mysterious. It accepts that everything is happening exactly as it should, and it works with a full-hearted commitment to change. It sets goals, but knows that the process is all there is. It is joyful in the midst of suffering and hopeful in the face of overwhelming odds. It is simple in a world of complexity and confusion. It is done for others, but it nurtures the self. It shields in order to be strong. It intends to eliminate suffering, knowing that suffering is limitless.
Are there any questions?
Well, just what kept on coming up for me was the sort of the other paradox of service, which is that on some level, where does it become okay that the service is ultimately for us as much as it is for the community or who we're serving, and where is that balance between the selflessness and the selfishness of giving? Just kept coming up over and over again.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question, and it's like I said earlier. If truly selfish people would probably do tons of service because you get so much out of it, and I feel it for myself all the time. I do it for me, but there again too, I think that's where they're really paying attention to the emotional and the physical and the felt, lived sense of all that can really sort of help guide that at times. If we're just doing it for ourselves, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have the same reward. It won't. And it's often in the act of it, there are the moments, maybe extended moments, when you lose a sense of self. You're just there to be for somebody else. You felt that as being a friend sometimes. There's all of a sudden there's no date, but there's just compassion or connection on some level, and that's when the result is really rich. I think sometimes too. That's when we're maybe the most nourished out of that. So,
but to also find a way to not feel shame or not feel guilt for getting pleasure out of service as well.
Right. Where we can add all those other layers on top of it. And we do. There again too, that's where awareness comes in. Oh yeah, there's that shame and guilt that comes back. It's really hard to escape our own conditioning. The trick is to see it clearly and then to bow to it and I don't mind being selfish sometimes if it's an unservice to somebody else. I'll allow that more than I will other kinds of selfishness. less shame and guilt around that. I've dealt with that a lot about my own motivation, because they say, you should really look at your pure motivation for doing something. I feel like my motivation is very layered sometimes. Because a lot of it is, out of my own desire to be seen, loved, cared for, At the same time, there's also, my heart's open, I want to help.
Host announcement then?
Yes.
There's some sweet rolls and there's some tea. If you do drink tea, please rinse out your cup afterwards. And also there's a Dharma bowl out there, and your generosity in contributing to the song would be greatly appreciated.
Other announcements? Yes?
Yeah, our speaker next week will be Doug Van Koss, who will be doing a program of chanting and drumming.
So I've been exploring the faith tradition of my childhood, so I haven't been here a lot. And as such, if anyone would like to be of service to the Sangha and take over my hosting duty and my GBF mailing list database maintenance duty, I would be happy to pass that baton along. So see me afterward.
Marvin?
Clint called me midweek and asked me to remind everybody that he's organized the annual GBF picnic. It's held in Tilden Park this year, this coming Saturday, August 9th. He's reserved the Lakeview picnic site, and he hopes this is a potluck type event, but there are lots of hiking trails there, and it's been enjoyable in the past. There are flyers out by the Dharma bowl, as well as a trail map of Tilden Park. Be a very nice event.
Michael?
My name is Michael. I'm the coordinator for the annual GBF retreat, and there are flyers and registration forms out by the Dharma bowl. It's happening September 19th through the 21st at Vajrapani Institute in Boulder Creek. And it's a great opportunity to connect more deeply with yourself and with members of the Sangha. So check it out.
Any other announcements? Could you do the closing dedication of merit, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Just take a moment to notice the connectedness that's in the room right now. May the merit of this practice, may whatever goodness of our intentions, may we share it. May we share it gladly with all that we encounter, with ourselves, with all in this room, with those that we meet as we leave. May we share it freely and gladly in hopes that all beings may know peace, understanding, compassion, friendliness. May all beings be free from suffering. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.